Crossing Nation. How are you doing? Are you doing good? Man, it's good to be with you. If you don't get anything out of today's message, I just want you to know this. Our church loves you. I loves you. I loves you. I'm trying coffee, guys. I started 2 weeks ago. I'm on the drip, and who knows what's going to happen today, okay? But I do know this. I hate my breath because I don't even want to talk to me. All right, that being said, I want to welcome all of you joining from our different locations, those of you watching online, and those of you a part of our Inside family. I'm so glad that you're here today. We are going to be talking about probably the second most famous story in all of Scripture. There's the story about Jesus, kind of a big deal, but then there's this one. And almost everybody, even if you're not a Christian, and if you're here today and you're not a Christian, you probably have heard this story, which is a bit of a challenge as a communicator, because how do you tell somebody something that they probably already know? But what you guys are going to do is you're going to pretend to be really attentive listeners. And I'm going to pretend that you haven't heard this story ever before. And I'm going to walk you through it. And I believe, if you'll stay with me all the way to the very end, that God will do a transformative work in your life in at least one of three areas. The story we're talking about today is the story of David and Goliath. The scene is set up with the Philistine army on one hillside, and then there's a valley, the valley of Elah, and then on the other side is the Israelite army. And in the middle of this valley is a small valley. And inside of this smaller valley, eventually David will reach down where there's some water running through it, and he will pick up some stones. We were going to be going to Israel in about 6 weeks. When I went to Israel the first time, I was in the valley of Elah. And while the guides were talking and people were conversing, I bent down in that very valley and pretended to tie my shoe. And I picked up a rock, and I put it in my pocket. And then I was like, well, David picked up 5 smooth stones. I picked up about 20, put them in different people's bags, got them back to the States. I'm selling them if you guys want them. $1,000 is where we're starting the bid. I have them, I'm just going to say, because you never know when you're going to face your giant. So there are these two opposing forces gathered on opposite hillsides. And a battle's about to take place. From the Philistine camp, there's a warrior. Let's look at him, chapter 17, verse 4. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. The word champion here means man of the interspaces. Turn to your neighbor, say interspaces. It refers to a man who stood in between two armies. A man who was willing to engage in single combat for his army. Now let's take a deeper look into this champion and what it would have been like to stand against him. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 4 through 7, give us a deep dive. This is what it has to say. His height was 6 cubits in a span. And you guys are all going, yeah, of course it is. And he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and an iron point weighed 600 shekels. And the shield bearer went ahead of him. And those of you guys are all going, well, we're big, into ancient weights and measures. We already get the picture. But for the two of you who don't know, let me unpack a little bit of this. Goliath stood 9 feet tall. In other words, if I was standing on a 24-inch stool, that's how tall Goliath was. In fact, when I was growing up for church, and they did the school plays, or the little church plays, they never picked me to be Jesus. Never. Nope. They never picked me to be the Apostle Paul. Guess who I've always been in every church play? Hey, Clayton, how about you play Goliath? Yeah, the guy who dies. Okay? His attack weapons were all of bronze, or were all of iron, and his defense weapons were all of iron. The bronze helmet would go on his head, and then he had a coat of scale armor. So think of like an Arctic bass, and then how all of those scales covered on the back, and it weighed 125 pounds. And he would just put this on and it would completely protect him. Then he had a spear that was the size of a weaver's rod. And all of you guys, when you're at Home Depot picking out your wife a brand new weaver's rod, you're going, boy, that's a pretty big weaver's rod. Think about 10 feet long. And then on the end, there was a 2-foot long point that weighed an additional 15 pounds. So this guy was hurling a 25-pound death instrument at his enemies. And add to all of this, there was a shield bearer who was going in front of him. 1 Samuel 17, 8 through 11. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. The people were dismayed and terrified for obvious reasons. Who is going to fight this giant? And if they fight this giant, will they win? The good news is, if we go out and we find someone who can fight this guy and we win, nobody else has to die. I like that part. Bad news. If we find a guy who's willing to fight Goliath and he loses, good news is only one person has to die. Because if we all go off to war, there's a chance that some of us are going to die in the fight. Worse news. If the guy we pick goes out to fight Goliath and he loses, we all become slaves. As the story unfolds, Jesse, David's father, is too old to be out to war. And so he's been sending David back and forth to the war to get reports about how his oldest 3 sons are doing in the battle. And then he has David come back, give a report, take care of the sheep for a while. Then Jesse's going, I got to know what's going on with the war. And so he sends David, and David has been going back and forth. So Jesse brings David in and says, David, I want you to go back to the front lines. I want you to take this food that I've gathered together, and I want you to give it to your brothers. And then I've got this pile of cheese that I want you to give to the commanding officer because, you know, every boss wants a bunch of cheese. And so maybe he'll be like, hey, this cheese is so good, let's keep these guys at the back of the line. And so he sends David out to bring back a report on how everybody is holding up. Well, David leaves and he arrives at the war camp just as the army was getting ready to go out to their battle lines, and Goliath issued his challenge. And everybody hears this challenge, and every time he issues this challenge, the Israelites would flee from him in great fear. But David has a different perspective. While everybody else is frustrated and scared and dismayed, he's looking at Goliath and going, who is this guy making such claims about the armies of the living God? Who would dare come against the people of God? And not just any God, a living God. And so he's paying attention to what everybody's saying, and David learns that Saul is offering an incredible reward to whoever goes and fights Goliath and wins. It's a threefold reward. The first one is you will get great wealth. Pretty nice. The second thing is you get to marry one of his daughters, which, if you're tired of being single, now you got a girl who you don't have to ask out. She's just your wife now. And then the third thing is, and this is where it gets really good, your family is exempt from taxes. This is where all of our campuses in Illinois are like, I understand now. One of us is going to go fight. We have got to deal with this. You know, those of you who are part of our Iowa campus and our 2 Missouri campuses, you're like, I don't get that part. I don't understand why the tax thing's such a big deal. But those of us in Illinois were like, we need a Goliath right now. And I'm already signing up to fight him. I don't care how big he is. Saul is trying to incentivize someone to go out and fight the Goliath. And so far, there have been, pay attention to this, 0 takers. No matter how good the reward is, nobody is saying, yep, I'm going to go out and fight this giant. But word eventually reaches Saul that David seems to be having a different feeling about this entire setup. That David might be the guy who's willing to go and fight the giant. So Saul sends for David. This is their interaction. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." David volunteers to go and fight, but Saul's like, you know what? You don't stand a chance. And David doesn't take no for an answer. He starts to walk Saul through his resume, and his resume is pretty impressive. I'm going to walk through this part slowly. I just want you to feel the imagery that we get here. Verses 34 through 36. But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, as you do, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair," he fights like a girl, "struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear." Did you see all of this? He's out taking care of his father's sheep, bunch of sheep out there. Lion or a bear show up, grab one of the little sheepsies, starts running off with it. And you know what he doesn't do? He doesn't go, "Well, you win some, you lose some." He says, "Oh no, not today." He chases down a lion, smacks it, grabs it out of its mouth. No. If the lion or the bear turns on him, grabs it by the hair, whacks it and kills it. How many of you guys have been to a zoo? Yeah. And from a distance, you know how they set it up where it feels like you're close, but you're just not? Like that's where you go to like most zoos. You kind of feel close to the animals, but you're really not. Now, if you want the opposite experience, go to the Peoria Zoo. Because that's where we went. We went to the Peoria Zoo, and they have a tiger. And most places have like the railing and then a big valley, and then, you know, the tiger. Not the Peoria Zoo. The Peoria Zoo has like a broken railing and chicken wire. And I'm assuming there's been some budget cuts because that tiger looked hungry. And we were kind of walking along, and I was going, you don't stand a chance. 0% chance that if this thing decided it wanted out, that you could stop it. And if it got a hold of you. So, I mean, I knew that it was like a lower end one. So we took my mother-in-law in case it did get out. You know, shook her hand with some Sweet Baby Ray's on it, said, "It's so good you're here." Wiped it in her hair and said, "You go first," right? This is David is seeing this and he's going, "Yeah, I've killed lions and bears." And he's not doing this from afar. He's doing this from up close. David was built different. I'm guessing he didn't have like cool Instagram filters. I'm guessing he was horrible at Minecraft. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not really good at those things. I'm more into killing lions and bears with my bare hands." I mean, like I always have like an exit strategy in case things go south, right? Like I sit and how many of you guys, me and my wife fight over this. When you go to a restaurant, how many of you want to make sure you can see the door? In case somebody crazy, you want to see it first. Yeah, the rest of you savages are just sitting there going, "Somebody else is going to save me." But those of us, when we're eating our Mexican, we want to see the front door in case someone comes in. And if you're navigating like a lion or a bear, you got to have a strategy. My strategy, well, you guys know the strategy. You always invite a fat friend, right? Like if you're camping with a bunch of friends and you're hanging around the campfire and you notice that you're the only fat guy, your trip insurance. These aren't your friends. If an animal shows up that tries to kill them, you're the sacrifice. You're the you are going to play the role of Jesus, okay? You always reminded me of Jesus. You're going to die for our sins because we're out of here. David doesn't allow himself that kind of position. He goes out and he kills a lion and a bear, and then David draws a connection. A connection that's a pretty profound one. Look at verse 36. This uncircumcised Philistine, Goliath, will be like one of them, the lion or the bear, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord, who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. This is what David says. I've been in difficult situations before. And in those difficult situations, the Lord rescued me. So this issue with Goliath is just another difficult situation that I'm going to find myself in, and it's just another opportunity for God to deliver me. He's not boasting in his abilities. He's boasting in God's. Now Saul tries to help David prepare for this battle, and he puts his own armor on David, and David's like, I can't walk around in all of this stuff. This doesn't fit me, and I'm not used to it. I'm going to go out, and I'm going to fight this giant in the same outfit that I protect my father's sheep in. Verse 40. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. He put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was a little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome. I understand David. And he despised him, okay? He said to David, am I a dog that you will come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day, I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. As David steps into the interspaces, Goliath is caught off guard. For 40 days and for 40 nights, he has stepped out from the ranks of the Philistine army, and he has issued this challenge. And for 40 days and for 40 nights, no one has accepted. And all of a sudden, a small boy emerges to fight him. Who is this that they are sending to fight me? A boy? He's insulted. And he has issued these threats. And they're more than idle threats. We're told that he's been a warrior from his youth. How many times has Goliath stood in this very spot? We know he's undefeated because if he had been defeated, he wouldn't have been issuing the challenge. And the warrior that they send is a boy. He would not be standing in front of the Israelite army if he hadn't won every single time. But David's reply is so incredibly strong. This is what David is saying to Goliath. You are coming at me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. But I am coming at you in the name of the Almighty God, and you can't cut him. You can't throw a spear at him. You can't put a javelin through him. You are fighting against my God, and he is going to put you into my hands. Verse 48. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran, stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. I got a couple takeaways for you. Takeaway number 1. Sometimes you are going to have to fight a battle that belongs to someone else. Who should have been fighting Goliath that day? It wasn't David. There was an obvious choice in Israel as to who should fight Goliath. Why wasn't Saul fighting Goliath? The Bible goes out of its way to tell us some special physical features about Saul. Look what it says. Go all the way back to chapter 9. Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome as a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. It doesn't just bring this up once. It brings this up again. Look at chapter 10, verse 23. They ran and brought him, this is Saul, out, and as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Who was Israel's champion? Who was the one who was bigger than everybody else? It was Saul. If you were picking based on physical features, who would be the champion for Israel? It would have been him. But for 40 days and for 40 nights, nobody stepped forward, not even Saul. But check this out. Saul wasn't just big, he was accomplished in battle. Look what it says in 14 verses 47 through 48. After Saul had assumed rule over Israel, he fought against their enemies on every side. Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. He fought valiantly and defeated the Amalekites, delivering Israel from the hands of those who had plundered them. Saul was the obvious choice. He was head and shoulders above everybody else, and he was accomplished in battle. But he didn't have the faith that God would deliver him if he faced a giant. There are some of you that are going to have to fight a battle that belongs to somebody else. Right now, all across our locations, there are some of you who are going to have to fight a battle that somebody else should have fought. You're going to have to step into an area that you never thought you were going to have to face. For some of you, it's going to be raising grandkids. You didn't see that one coming. For some of you, you're going to have tough conversations with managers or leaders in the organization about ethics, and it shouldn't have been on you to do it. Some of you, you're going to end up raising a child by yourself because your spouse walked out. And you're going to find yourself fighting a battle that you never thought you'd have to fight. You're going to find yourself fighting a battle that belonged to somebody else. I just want you to know, if you find yourself in that spot, God sees you, and he's with you, and the battle belongs to the Lord. Takeaway number 2, faith is a muscle. I'm going to break this down in 2 parts, so just stay with me. Saul didn't have to let David fight Goliath. David proved that he was ready to fight Goliath because he had brought receipts. He had a track record of faithfulness. He had killed the lion, he had killed the bear, and he believed that God would protect him in the fight against Goliath. People will sometimes come up to me at church and say that they want to go into full-time ministry. And you know what I like to do inside of my head? I don't say this out loud because that would be rude. But in my head I go, where's the lion or the bear? If you haven't already been faithful in your walk with the Lord personally, what makes you think that you're ready to navigate it organizationally? There's people who want to be leaders in the church, and I just kind of want to look around. Look for the bear skin. Look for the lion skin. Some of you, how many of you bought your kid an absolutely brand new car when they turned 16? You're like, yeah, we're idiots. So we're so rich, we were like, we want to wreck a new vehicle, right? What do? You give your kid, I don't want to say a car because then someone's going to be like, you hurt my feelings, I saved so long for this car, but the car that you're like, okay, that'll be his first car. Like, God bless Hondas, right? And it's got 300,000 miles. It doesn't even need oil, which is good because she's not going to change it. And you just give it to them and let it ride, right? And once they're faithful with the old car, over time, you allow them to have a nicer car when they're paying for it. Your kid wants a cell phone. Well, have you been faithful with your comforter? And have you learned to make your bed? Are you doing a good job with your iPad? Are you being nice to your mom? Are you getting yourself ready in the morning? Before I'm going to trust you with a bigger thing, you need to be faithful in smaller things. You have to learn to be faithful and trustworthy in smaller areas. And when you do that, your faith and your faithfulness grows. Faith is a muscle. Which leads me to this point. God is the one who did the work. David's job was to have the faith. You might be wondering, how did David know that God was going to deliver him? That he was going to win against Goliath? It's because of the lion and the bear. Faith is a muscle. Because David had turned over the situation against the lion to God, and he had turned over the situation against the bear to God, he was used to turning things over to God, and he had built up confidence. His faith had been strengthened, and so when it came to the giant, it wasn't about what he was facing, it was about who he was facing it with. His faith in God had grown. Faith is a muscle, and the more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Here's what I mean. The more areas of your life that you turn over to Jesus, the more areas of your life you will want to turn over to Jesus. Because after you see his faithfulness in these areas, you'll be like, well, I want to see his faithfulness in this area, and I want to see his faithfulness in this area. More than likely, one of the reasons why you are struggling in a particular area, you keep hitting a lid, is because you don't believe that God has the solution for the challenge that you're facing. So you keep bumping up against it. You keep thinking, I'm going to try all these other ways because you don't have enough faith, that you haven't developed a track record that God took care of me here, God took care of me here, God took care of me here, God took care of me here. And when you face this, you'll have the faith to believe that God will take care of you in this situation too. David's courage came from knowing that God was faithful in his past and would be faithful in his present. And this is one of the tough challenges because God always chooses to work through people with faith. It is impossible to please him without it. And God does his mighty works through people of faith. Let me explain it to you. God is the one who freed the people from Pharaoh. But Moses is the one who had to stand and defy the oppressors. God was the one who parted the Red Sea, but Moses had to stand on the banks. God was the one who parted the Jordan River, but the people still had to put their feet out when the waters were raging. God was the one who brought the walls of Jericho down, but the people still had to do the walking. God was the one who delivered the Midianites into the hands of Gideon, but they still had to blow the trumpets and break the jars. God was the one who made Peter walk on water, but Peter was the one who had to step out of the boat. God was the one who fed the 5,000, but the boy was the one who had to give up his lunch. Some of us, we want our marriage to get better, but we want our spouse to be the one who does the repenting. Oh, you're like, I like this sermon. Until then. Okay. Stay with me. It gets worse. We want Jesus to change our work environment and reduce the drama. but we want them to do the changing. We want our families and friends to know about Jesus, but we want somebody else to do the praying, the inviting, and the discipling. We want a closer walk with Jesus, but we want somebody else to do the praying. We lack the courage to believe that God will show up and bring about change. We want God to do the work in everybody else, instead of believing that God could do the work in us. If you want to see God move, and if you want to see God do something, it starts with you moving out of the ranks and in front of the giant, believing that God will get you through. I don't know why this happened, but a while back, I just started kind of having soundtracks to my sermons. It makes me a complete dork. And late one night, I was on my phone, and I came across this 30-second clip of worship, and it hit me in such a profound way. The next day, I searched and searched and searched until I could find it again. I have to issue a disclaimer. This style of worship is not ideal. There's things about the worship that I'm not necessarily okay with theologically. But there was something about the way that they were singing it that moved me in a profound way. I don't understand these artists. Their songs are like 50-minute songs. So like imagine if they were leading worship at our church. Guys, we're just going to have 3 songs, then we're going to get right into the sermon. You're like, oh my goodness, you better order some food in because we're going to be here a while. Like 3 hours later, everybody's asleep, and then I get up. Well, that's about what it is. Okay. But I was in a season where it just kind of felt like there were a bunch of challenges, giants, if you will. And the way that they were singing this one part of the song impacted me in a profound way. And I would say for the last 6 to 8 months, this song, this 50-minute song, and I'm not going to play the whole thing for you, has been the soundtrack of the sermons that I've preached. And I want to share it with you. Watch this video.
If I ever needed you, I need you now. If I ever wanted you, I want you now. There's no better time. If I ever needed you, I need you now. There's no better time. If I ever needed you, I need you. Hey. If I ever wanted you, I want you now. If I ever needed you, I need you. If I ever needed you, I need you now. If I ever needed you, I need you now. If I ever need, I need you now.
I'm going to play it again to you, and I just want to take you through what I think about when I think about you in this song. There's some of you haven't felt God in a really long time. You haven't seen him, you haven't experienced him, and you're kind of wondering where he is. But you won't experience God when you're standing among the ranks because you don't need him when you're hiding. But when you decide to take a step out and say, this giant in my life needs addressed, needs dealt with. If you were to pick a prayer, it would be this one. If I ever needed you, I need you right now. God, my parenting is falling apart, and no matter what I try, it's not working. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get through. If I ever needed you, I need you. right now. My marriage, my spiritual walk, my finances. God, this giant is too big, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to proceed. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. God, I need you. And I know I'm going to need you next month, and I know I'm going to need you next week, and I know I'm going to need you tomorrow. But God, I'm not so much worried about an hour from now. I'm worried about right now. My addiction doesn't need you tomorrow. It needs you now. If I ever needed you, I need you now. And you are going to have to take a step of faith to believe that God will meet you in the battle. Now, I don't want to make every single thing that you're facing out to be a Goliath. And I don't want you all walking out of here thinking that you are warriors. But the bottom line is every single day, you are going to face a challenge. And you have two choices: to stay in the ranks or to believe that God will see you through. And there are people who need you to take down the giants and the challenges and the fears and the worries and the anxieties and the uncomfortable nature of sharing your faith. But you also need to know this. Fourth takeaway: Goliath was not the biggest giant that God defeated. There has always been a giant, a three-headed dragon, if you will: Satan, sin, and death. And Satan tries to steal and kill and destroy all that God has for his people. Sin brings pain and envy and strife and evil into every relationship and every experience, and the inevitable result is death. Oh, it's a physical death and it's a spiritual death, but it's also an emotional death, a relational death. But the good news of the gospel is that we too have a champion, a man of the interspaces. He is 100% human, and so he understands the human experience, but he's 100% God who has power over life and death. He comes from miraculous beginnings, born of a virgin, his birth heralded by angels, visited by wise men from a distant country, grew up in Nazareth, ministered along the Sea of Galilee. He's a confounder of religious elites. He's a friend of sinners. He's a water-walking, miracle-working, demon-casting, cross-carrying, resurrecting king. And he hung in the inner spaces for you and for me to make a way when there was no way, to bring about freedom to you and to me. However, to experience it, to receive it, and to pass it on requires you to take the step of faith, to receive it and share it. And I hope you'll do just that. We're moving to a time of decision. One of the things I love about this church is that every single week there is somebody who chooses to start an intimate personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And sometimes we know who it is, and sometimes we have no clue who it is. But right now, here at our 48th Street location, and to those of you who are watching online, there is somebody who has never said yes to Jesus. And if I could put this sermon in your spiritual context, here's what you need to know. You can't earn your salvation. You can't stack up against the giant that faces you. You don't stand a chance against Satan. You don't stand a chance against sin. And you don't stand a chance against death. You've already messed it up. You've already disqualified yourself from the fight. But Jesus was our warrior who stood in the interspace on your behalf. See, the only way that you are getting to heaven is if you are righteous, and you're not. But when Jesus died on the cross for your sins, he took our sin on himself and he gave us his righteousness. That's why the Bible screams, by his stripes, we are healed. And if you're here today or watching online and you've never started an intimate personal relationship with Jesus Christ, you need to be saved. You need salvation. And salvation, the Bible tells us, Jesus tells us, is only found in him. That if you want to be in heaven, if you want to be with the Father, there is only one way to the Father. Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through him. You might have a really good metabolism. It's not going to do you any good. You might give to a lot of charities. Not going to do you a bit of good. You might be extra nice to your dog. You might even have a cat. And none of those good works matter. You could have been faithful to your wife your whole life. You could have, been a really good employee. You could have prayed 10 times a day before you even got to work. Outside of a relationship with Jesus Christ, where you receive his work on the cross in your life, there is a 0% chance that you enter into the glories of heaven. Jesus stepped in and fought the battle that we could never win. All you have to do is say, I'm ready to receive it and accept it, be changed by it, and live differently because of it. And if you're here today and you have questions about what happens after you die, and you're not sure where you stand, there's somebody right over there by the baptistry in just a second who'd love a chance to talk to you about that. To the rest of you in the room, you're wanting to see a move of God. You're wanting to see him do something in your life. You've been bumping up against the same challenge, the same addiction, the same sin, the same situation. You've got a proverbial Goliath in front of you. It is not going away. And it might not even be yours to fight, but it is in your way. So what I'm going to encourage you to do, whatever it is, would you spend some time on the steps praying that God would use you to address it? Would you spend some time on your knees saying, God, I can't fight this on my own. You are going to have to fight this battle. You are going to have to deliver the victory. And hear me, there are people all around you that need people who've been transformed by that kind of faith to point them to Jesus. And he wants to use you. When we pray those kind of prayers, would you stand with me? God, I'm asking you to do a work today, a work that only you can do in ways that only you can do it. God, you know the full extent of the pain and the heartache and the sorrow and the fear and the anxiety that people are facing. God, you know for every single person in this room at all of our locations exactly what they're going through and exactly what they need. God, give us the humility to receive your guidance, your counsel, to recognize that we can't do this on our own. But God, give us the courage to step out and believe that you will be faithful. In your name I pray, amen.